The dusty roads of St. Louis, the summer of 1904. A man crosses the marathon finish line. The crowd roars. Alice Roosevelt, the daughter of the President of the United States, steps forward, ready to place a laurel wreath around his neck. There's just one small problem. He didn't run the race. Not most of it anyway. He rode in a car. And believe it or not, that's not even the strangest thing that happened that day. This is the story of the 1904 Olympic Marathon, the wildest, woolliest, most gloriously insane race in American history, and honestly, one of the greatest stories our country has ever produced. Let me set the scene. It's the third modern Olympic Games, and for the first time ever, they are being held on American soil, right here in St. Louis, Missouri. The Games were folded into the Great World's Fair that year, the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, a dazzling celebration of American progress with electric lights and grand palaces and crowds from all over the globe. The nation is bursting with pride and ambition. But nobody, and I mean nobody, was ready for what the marathon had in store. Start with the weather. This race was run in the dead of the afternoon, starting just after 3 o'clock, in brutal, punishing heat, around 90 degrees. The course wound nearly 25 miles over dusty country roads, 7 hills baked hard as brick, some of them steep enough to break a strong man's stride. And here's the kicker. Officials followed the runners in automobiles, early cars coughing and rumbling along, kicking up enormous clouds of choking dust that hung in the air and coated every gasping athlete head to toe. At least one runner, a fellow named William Garcia of California, breathed in so much of that road dust that it tore up his stomach. He collapsed and nearly died out there, and might have if he hadn't been found in time. That's how dangerous the very air had become. Now you'd think in that kind of heat they'd have water stations every mile. You would think that. But the man in charge, an official named James Sullivan, had a theory, a truly wild theory. He wanted to study the effects of dehydration during extreme exertion. So on a course nearly 25 miles long in 90-degree heat, he gave the runners exactly 2 chances to drink, a water tower around the 6-mile mark and a single roadside well about 11 miles in. That was it. It was less a sporting event and more a science experiment, and the runners were the guinea pigs. And the runners, oh, the runners. This might be the most wonderful collection of human beings ever assembled for a foot race. Of the 32 men who towed the line, a good many had never run a marathon in their lives, and some had scarcely trained at all. Take Andarín Carvajal, a mailman from Cuba. He'd raised money to get to St. Louis by running laps in a public square in Havana until people paid attention, then lost every dollar of it gambling in New Orleans on the way. He arrived with nothing, and hadn't eaten a real meal in days. So he ran the Olympic marathon in the only clothes he had. A pair of dress trousers he cut off at the knees with scissors right before the start, a shirt, a beret, and a pair of heavy dress shoes. He was such a cheerful character that he trot alongside the officials in their cars, chatting away in broken English while everyone else was dying in the heat. Somewhere out on that course, hungry as ever, he spotted an orchard and helped himself to a couple of apples. Trouble was, the apples were green. They gave him terrible stomach cramps. So what did this magnificent man do? He lay down by the side of the road and took a nap. Took a nap in the middle of the Olympics. Then he woke up, dusted himself off, and got back to running, and he still finished fourth. Fourth. You cannot make this up. Then there were Len Tauniane and Jan Mashiane, 2 Zulu men from South Africa, the first black Africans ever to compete in the Olympic Games. They weren't even there as athletes exactly. They'd come to the World's Fair as part of a South African exhibit and entered the race on the spot. They ran the entire brutal course barefoot, and by most accounts they ran it beautifully. But at one point, poor Len Tauniane got chased clean off the course by a stray dog, driven a full mile out of his way through a cornfield before he could get back on track. He still finished 9th. 9th after a detour like that. Think about that grit. But the heart of our story is 2 other men. The first is Fred Lorz, a New Yorker who worked nights as a bricklayer and trained when he could. Early in the race, Lorz cramped up badly in that awful heat, somewhere around the 9-mile mark, and simply couldn't go on. So he climbed into an automobile to get a lift back toward the stadium. The car carried him about 11 miles, waving at runners and spectators as it rolled past. And then, wouldn't you know it, the car itself broke down. Feeling refreshed, Lorz hopped out and jogged the rest of the way in. He came trotting into that stadium looking fresh as a daisy, and the crowd went absolutely wild, certain they were watching the champion. Alice Roosevelt came down to crown him. Cameras flashed. For a few glorious, ridiculous minutes, Fred Lorz was treated as the Olympic marathon champion. Then the truth came tumbling out, the joke collapsed, and an embarrassed Lorz confessed. He was banned from competition for a year, though here's a lovely footnote. The very next year, in 1905, he won the Boston Marathon fair and square on his own 2 feet. Which brings us to the real winner and maybe the most astonishing story of all. Thomas Hicks, British-born but running for the United States out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, was out front and fading fast, ravaged by the heat and the dust and that cruel lack of water. 10 miles from the finish, he begged to lie down. He begged to quit, but his handlers wouldn't let him, and what they did next belongs to another century entirely. To keep him moving, they dosed him on the move with tiny amounts of strychnine. Yes, the same stuff used in rat poison mixed with raw egg whites. Back then, in small doses, strychnine was believed to be a stimulant. Later, they gave him another dose with brandy and egg whites and pushed him back onto the road. Hicks kept going. Barely. His skin turned ashen gray, and by the end he was hallucinating, convinced the finish line was still 20 miles away when it was right in front of him. He asked for something to eat and to lie down. His legs had all but stopped working. In the final stretch, his handlers were essentially holding him up, his feet skimming the ground, more carried than running, his mind so far gone he was practically sleepwalking. And in that state, half-conscious, poisoned, propped up by 2 men. Thomas Hicks crossed the line first and won the Olympic gold medal in a time of 3 hours, 28 minutes and 53 seconds, one of the slowest ever recorded. He had to be carried off, and 4 doctors worked on him before he came around. It took hours before he was himself again. He'd lost some 8 pounds over the course of the race. He never ran another marathon, but he was and is the champion. When the dust finally settled, only 14 of the 32 men who started that race managed to finish it at all. It remains the slowest, strangest, most chaotic marathon in Olympic history, and it became a lasting warning about how dangerous these races could be. And yet, I don't think of it as a disaster. I think of it as something beautiful. Because look at what it really was. A mailman in dress shoes, 2 barefoot pioneers making history, a bricklayer whose bad joke became a legend, a poisoned man who simply would not stop. These were ordinary people from all over the world gathered on American ground, doing something gloriously, stubbornly human. They ran through heat and dust and confusion and green apples and stray dogs, and most of the wonder is that they ran at all. We've come so far since that dusty afternoon in St. Louis. We have water stations now, and sports medicine, and rules that actually protect the people who compete. Every safe, well-run race you see today owes a quiet debt to the chaos of 1904 because we learned from it. But what hasn't changed, what I hope never changes, is that spirit, that refusal to lie down for good, that willingness to get back up, dust yourself off, and finish what you started, no matter how ridiculous the road gets. That's the American spirit at its finest. And if a man can run nearly 25 miles on green apples and pure heart, well, then maybe the rest of us can keep going too.